Call to order. And at this time of the meeting, there's always an open forum for anybody online or in the public that wishes to speak before the commission, before the board on any item that's not on the agenda. We have none in attendance. Do we have any online?
No emails.
Okay. Approval of the meeting minutes from June 13th, which were in the packet. Is there a move to approve or correct or any comments?
Make a motion to approve.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, I will not comment because I was not here for the June meeting. Discussion items, Paradise Drive Complete Streets Project.
Great, thanks. Thank you, Chair Bundy and members of the Flood Board. Today, we want to discuss an update to the Paradise Drive Complete Streets project, which, as you all, I think, know from following this, does have a component of climate adaptation, given the roadway is in close proximity to the bay and is at an elevation that likely has some vulnerabilities to sea level rise. And with that, we have one of our consultants who's the lead for the project from BKF Engineers. And this is Becky Dower, and she'll be participating and presenting some slides. But for right now, I'll turn over to Chris and he can start us off and introduce Becky and her part as needed.
All right, thanks, RJ. So, as you mentioned, the two discussion items tonight are the Paradise Drive Complete Street Project, road elevation, and the Marina Village Retention Pond maintenance schedule. So to start it off, in our last meeting, we had discussed a bit of what our plan was as far as analyzing the flood control on Paradise Drive. So we had our consultant, Schaff and Wheeler, as part of the storm drain master plan, go out and inspect the culverts under Paradise Drive and analyze the watershed. And they determined that the existing culverts had plenty of capacity while modeling a 25-year storm during a 100-year tide. So that is a pretty good sign, and we shouldn't have to increase the size of those culverts as part of this project. Given that we still did see some water overtopping Paradise Drive this winter, so we think that that is likely because the road has a low point where water is able to cross. And the second issue is that there's some thick vegetation growing in the roadside ditch, which causes slow flows, and it also causes water to back up more. So to address those two issues, we're going to plan to raise the road, which is going to be discussed in the next few slides. However, clearing out the vegetation is a bit more difficult because the ditch is considered sensitive habitat. So it's unlikely that we're going to be able to deal with that issue in the near future. So for the road elevation and sea level rise factors, there's kind of 5 topics that we're going to go through. The pedestrian bridge clearance, wave run up, sea level rise risk, design life of the road, and then future phase protection approach. So there's the pedestrian bridge that goes in between the two schools, or Marina Country Day School in the parking lot. We've analyzed the existing road elevation and the pedestrian bridge height, and have determined that we can raise the road with a design exception for the height of the pedestrian bridge. The existing bridge is 17 feet, and Caltrans recommends a minimum clearance of 17 feet for pedestrian bridges. But they recommend 15 feet for all other bridges in the highway design manual. And the tallest vehicle load allowed in California is 14 feet. So they're being a bit conservative with the 17-foot elevation. if we use a 15-foot clearance that they allow for most bridges, we can raise the road up to an elevation of 11.6 feet, which should protect the road from local flooding and future sea level rise. And we'll get into that in the next few slides.
And just to clarify, so the elevations listed are NAVD 88. And yeah, as mentioned, Chris was stating that this process would involve a possible design exception from that standard for pedestrian bridges of 17 feet, which is interestingly enough 2 foot more than you would have for a regular bridge. And we can all speculate on why that is, but I think it's an exception that we would be willing to proceed with if we had the support of everyone.
So the next topic is the wave run up. So typically it's recommended that you should use a 2-foot wave run up in the Bay Area when you're calculating sea level rise and flood risk. Fortunately, in this location, we have the marsh and the school's field in between the bay and our road. So in this case, we would typically expect that those two obstructions would knock down any waves and you wouldn't expect any wave run up. However, we decided as far as this exercise to use a 1-foot wave run up just to be conservative in the worst case scenario.
So when looking at, for those of you that participated in the climate adaptation assessment, you know, there was a lot of discussion about these categories, right? You have the projections, and there's different low and high risk projections that we'll get to about how much sea level rise to expect over a certain timeline. Secondly, how much wave run up during a storm surge you would expect. And they're kind of these set parameters for the Bay Area specific within the Bay. You know, you get to coastlines and it's a very different story. But they kind of range from 0 to 2 feet of wave run up that you would add on top of whatever the sea level rise forecast that you are projecting. Given what Chris is saying, given the flat topography, the gradual topography leading up to the actual roadway, we think that will dissipate that wave energy fairly well and feel comfortable at a 1-foot wave run up criteria. This is a prescriptive approach. This is something you could calculate. It's something that, for instance, on a bigger project like Foster City's levee, they did a full analysis of that. But for, I think, our purposes, for it being a roadway, you know, we're kind of applying this information and think it's a reasonable approach. So want to get your thoughts, but we feel comfortable with a 1-foot wave run up for this part of the discussion.
Quick, one question was,
Which are?
oh, there we go. Is the 1 foot is vertical height from kind of where it's like the normal elevation expected would be, like on the 100 years? So it's the 100-year plus a foot?
Yeah, so we're obviously going to look at maximum conditions.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what we want to consider. But that wave run up can happen at any condition. So you might have a really heavy storm and you get that full wave run up, but at that particular time, the tide might not be at its max. So it's a less of a factor.
And so is this 100-year astronomical tide, just basically the highest tide you would see based on the moon and the earth? And
yeah, so well, I don't know if I'll answer that exactly. We'll get to some of this when Becky has some more detailed information, but we're taking our current king tides that we all have measured and seen, and then we are using the guidance related to future sea level rise, and we're going to discuss low versus medium risk and what those deltas are over time, how much it's going to increase, and then on top of that, we're layering this potential 1-foot wave run up on top of that.
you're looking at the 25-year storm on top of that, essentially, because it seems odd to choose a 100-year tide in a 25-year storm where the astronomical tides are going to be much lower than they would be if there is a large storm with the low pressure system. That's going to give you the largest increase you see. And so I'd just be curious to see the underlying calculations of how these were chosen, because if you had a 100-year storm, you're going to add a lot more on top of your high tide mark, essentially, because of the low pressure. So I'd be curious to see the basis for these calculations at some point.
Sure, yeah, and we can look into that. And I think really for today's meeting, and I'm not saying you don't have good points that we'll have to fact check and make sure that we're all on the same page, but they're really kind of independent analyses, right? There was a culvert analysis done by our Chaffin Wheeler, our storm drain master plan consultant, and they did a HEC-RAS model using 25-year storm event with a 100-year tide event.
Yeah.
And then separately, we're kind of taking that, putting it off the side and doing something completely different, forgetting the 25-year element, and we're looking at sea level rise projections plus different heights of wave run up on top of that.
Yeah, and on that point, you were asking for our opinion. I think the 1 foot wave run up is plenty for this area for the reasons you described, and there's not a lot of fetch, and the wind's not going to be blowing that direction during a huge storm anyway. So that all makes sense to me.
Yeah, I actually do have an observation because we live just like on the other edge of the marsh. And then during the king tide events, I don't know what the delta in elevation is. I mean, I think the foot is a good accommodation for it. But if you have a big storm, like wind come from the south, the surge, which I think is what this is trying to account for, it comes up probably 8-10 inches above the king tide elevation, because I've observed like a king tide with no storm, it's kind of, yeah, we get a little water in the backyard, right? But when there's been a storm event and there's a lot of wind and wind driven surge, it picks up a lot and it ends up back in the street. I've called Chris about it, and the little pump station is doing its thing and all that. So just, that's my observation of what actually happens when you have a king tide with a wind driven event on top of it. So
I think that is what they're talking about. Like the wave run up is wind driven and storm driven. Yeah.
And then maybe before you move to the next step, did you look at any settlement rates along that stretch? I know there's not a lot of weight of fill around there, but maybe around the school. I don't know if we have any past data for elevations to see whether it's slowly sinking like Mariner Cove is.
I know settlement's been a definitely a valid discussion point. We haven't gone to that level analysis. That would be part of our kind of geotech process as we move forward.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely something to keep in mind and not lose sight of as we.
had the roadway elevation settled then? Is that part of why it's got a dip? Is that a settling issue or just it was constructed that way?
It's possible. It happens to be the lowest spot is right underneath the pedestrian bridge. So I don't know if that has something to do with it, but it's kind of just right in the middle of Paradise. Like this area is quite a bit lower.
And I bring it up because the areas that have been measured in Mariner Cove show differential sinking in different parts of the neighborhood. So it's possible something's happening here as well.
Yeah. And I mean, we can incorporate lightweight fill and other measures to try and counteract that when we build this project. So the next topic was the sea level rise risk. So we looked at the state of California sea level rise guidance, and they kind of have two risk factors, low risk aversion and medium to high risk aversion. And both of them, they don't say exactly which one you're supposed to use. You're kind of supposed to decide for yourself what factors go into what you're building and what the risk is. But generally for the low risk aversion, they say it represents approximately 17% chance of being overtopped in its life or design life. So they use an example of, if you're designing an unpaved coastal trail, it's less of an issue if it gets overtopped. But, in that medium to high risk aversion, they use a coastal housing development where that type of risk isn't acceptable. So, yeah, we'll have to consider which one, and based on which one you choose, it basically tells you where you're designing or how far out you're designing the life of the project. So on the next slide, we kind of go into our calculations for this. So we kind of work backwards on this because we have a limited height we can raise the road to based off the pedestrian bridge. So using an 11.6 foot elevation with 1 foot wave run up, and then the current maximum king tide is 7.2 feet. So you subtract those from 11.6, and that gives us 3.4 feet of room, above the current max. So looking at the lower version, which is this line on this table, that gets us to 2,100 until we would start experiencing, issues with sea level rise overtopping the road. If you're looking at the medium to high version, we would be protected until 2070.
And let me add, there's another layer here. So in the same chart, you can see on one hand, we've got this low risk aversion versus medium to high risk aversion. And separately, we also have a low emission and high emission prediction. So for simplicity and to be conservative, we're taking the high emission value as we have this conversation. So again, another added layer of conservativeness as we approach this. But what Chris is saying is correct. We believe 3.4 feet where we can raise the road and still be under that bridge clearance standard identified by the Caltrans Highway Design Manual.
And so the last piece is phase protection approach. So, if we build this project as we're proposing and then get to the end of its design life, or even sometime in the future and we want to protect it, there is an option to add a berm on the west side of the road to protect the low area from sea level rise and from flood events. So I shared this slide at a previous meeting, but it basically shows based on elevation, how far we have to go back to raise the road. So 10 feet, 11 feet, 12 feet. And then at that time, I just drew this line in. It's not necessarily how far we'd have to go, but we could build a berm along the edge of the road to further protect it from future flood events. And so
the design length of that bridge, because I can't imagine that bridge is going to be in its current state in 2070. It'll be 100 years old. So
yeah, that's a great point.
That's a good point.
Yeah, they may have rebuilt it by then and built it higher up, so it might not be even an issue. But
typically, from working on bridges in the past, usually 75 years is kind of where you assume a service life is for a bridge, and so that one may actually be approaching it in the next couple decades. So, and yeah, if they did come in and apply, that would be an opportunity to ask them to raise it at that time.
Yeah.
So well ahead of the worst case of the 2070, we would have a couple different options here.
I feel like this stretch is a perfect test case for Corte Madera in general for an iterative approach that we've talked about elsewhere, where you can build a structure that will essentially protect against rising sea levels. But if you need to, you can add to it in the future. It's not as easy in other areas, but this is a perfect place to at least start this and show how it could be done, where you can build on what you start today in the future.
okay, and so Becky is going to show us a few exhibits at cross sections in the lowest point underneath.
There we go. Let's go back one. Well, good evening, folks. As RJ mentioned at the start of the meeting, my name is Becky Dower. I'm with BKF Engineers, and I'm a consultant to the town for the design of the Paradise Drive Complete Streets project. I have been working with Chris and RJ to, as Chris mentioned, sort of walk back what sort of scenarios we can protect Paradise Drive against based on some of the constraints that we have out there. Our constraint that we are dealing with right now, the tightest constraint is this private pedestrian bridge at the Marin Montessori School. So again, working backwards from how high we could reasonably elevate the roadway without impacting that private structure, we have set the minimum roadway elevation underneath that bridge, and that is at 11.6, or rather the maximum elevation under that bridge at 11.6. So I have a series of graphics here that will illustrate what that protects against, right? Because with the sea level rise, there's so many different factors. Depending on the risk that we look at, depending on the run up that we look at, the year, we have numerous, infinite different scenarios that this roadway configuration can protect against. So we're going to start by looking at the scenarios that we've identified, and as Chris has justified as the likely scenarios. So this is starting with a 7.2 foot king tide, a 1 foot wave run up on top of that, and then different projections for sea level rise based on the low risk inversion scenario. So these next few slides will take us through time chronologically forward in years to see what the water surface elevation could look like on that road. To help you get oriented here, let's see if I can get my cursor in the right spot. There we go. Right here where I'm trying to highlight, that is where Paradise Drive is positioned currently. So that is the road currently. This up here, this represents our proposed roadway surface. You can see it's significantly elevated above the existing roadway surface down here. These blue lines that you're going to see on this slide and subsequent slides, this represents the water surface elevation with the 7.2 foot king tide, the 1 foot wave run up, and then the sea level rise projection for various different design years. So we're going to start by looking at the 2050 sea level rise projections for the low risk inversion scenario. Under this scenario, this blue line, this sits at about elevation 9.2. So your existing Paradise Drive, I guess it's the eastbound lane, would be underwater in this scenario, but you can see our proposed roadway elevation sits quite proud of where that water level would be in 2050. So lots of protection under that scenario.
Yeah, and before we leave these series of slides, can you talk about also the inland side of the channel and how that has some benefits as well?
Absolutely. So this channel that you see over here, that's the inland roadside ditch that runs along Paradise. We would not plan on making any modifications to the ditch as part of this project because it does have environmentally sensitive areas in it. You will see, though, that there is some hydraulic connectivity between this drainage ditch and the bay, and that's from the culverts. They don't show up on this cross section because they're not in this location, but the culverts that connect between the bay and those inland side ditches. Is there anything more you want to say on that, RJ?
Is that the concern that as the elevation comes up, they can backflow into the ditch then, essentially? Do they?
I don't know if it's a concern, but it is something that would happen under the way that the culverts are configured now. The water would start to back water into those drainage ditches under these events that we're looking at.
It does that now, during high tides, bay water pushes through the culvert and then it drains at low tide. But it looks like what you're saying is that even as sea level rises, water would pile up behind the new roadway, but then at low tide, it would still drain and it would not overtop from the land side.
Exactly.
Unless it was a huge storm.
Right. So show me that laser pointer trick. But the dashed line, right, is kind of the existing grade. And so as we saw last October 24th, it did overtop over that grade, but now in the future condition, you've got a raised road, raised sidewalk that is preventing that from overtopping, building up some level of pressure head and hopefully keeping it in the ditch and then forcing it out through the culverts.
All right, let's fast forward 20 more years. So looking at 2070, again, this is king tide, 7.2 foot king tide, 1 foot wave run up, and then projected sea level rise under the low risk inversion scenario. We now have a water surface elevation shown in blue here that is at about 10 feet, 10.2 feet. You could see that inland ditch is filled with water under this case here, and we start to see some water that would be theoretically flooding over the Marin Montessori School property, over their soccer field, over the marsh. So you can see that water is represented here. This is the same roadway configuration, same elevation as we saw on the previous slide. And you can see we still have, you know, 1.5 feet of freeboard essentially at minimum where between our road surface and that projected water surface elevation. So the design elevation of 11.6 would also provide protection against the theoretical 2070 sea level rise scenario. And same thing on the side with the ditch. We are quite elevated above the ditch on that end as well. So no inundation in the roadway under this particular scenario. All right, let's look at the year 2100 now. This is forecasted quite a bit into the future. You know, 80 years from now would be beyond the reasonable design life of a roadway. The roadway might follow the same general alignment, but we would expect at this point that, you know, the roadway surfacing would certainly need to be revisited. A lot of the drainage infrastructure that exists would probably need to be revisited at that point, at that time as well. So this is significantly in the future for our project. This shows the same general roadway configuration that we had looked at in the previous slides. And this blue line continues to represent king tide plus 1 foot wave run up, but now with the sea level rise for the year 2100. So you can see under this scenario that we would expect sea level rise plus the wave run up plus king tide to be just about equal to where our roadway surface elevation is located. Yeah.
We're told Brian is trying to get in, but we don't see him.
Is that him right there?
Although I see Ramon is, Brian and Ramon are both here.
RJ, I don't know if you hear me, but I'm here listening in. Thank you.
Excellent, great. And it looks like Ramon is as well remotely.
Yes, yes. So am I. I joined just as the meeting was being recorded. I'm homesick, but I'm able to log in.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so this scenario, we have surface water that is still below but approaching the same elevation as our roadway at 11.6. On the ditch side, you can see that the roadway is still higher than the water surface elevation in that ditch. However, by this point in time, we would be relying on this retaining structure that we would need to support the pathway to also be a barrier for the water so that it doesn't get underneath the roadway subgrade. As was mentioned earlier in this meeting, that pedestrian bridge will likely not be in its existing configuration in the year 2100. So this is just a scenario to walk us through what sorts of sea level rise scenarios the roadway could be protected against with this current design. It could reason that the bridge could be modified by this point in time and that we'd have additional opportunities to elevate the roadway if needed 80 years in the future. I've got one more slide here, and this shows projected water surface elevation with the king tide, with the wave run up for in excess of the year 2100. And this is really just to show you what we can do to potentially adapt the project to future conditions. With the bridge as being a constraint now, assuming we construct this road to elevation 11.6 and we don't revisit the elevation of this roadway prism 80 years out from now, we do have opportunities in this low spot by the pedestrian bridge to employ some alternative tactics that could include this, something like this earthen swale here. This would be sort of like a seawall or a levee, so to speak, along the outside edge of the road. That could be utilized to help protect the road from flooding. You can see in this 2100 plus scenario that the water surface elevation has increased on this ditch side as well, but it is still below where we'd anticipate the sidewalk to be with the roadway elevation at 11.6. The berm or the levee, the seawall, what have you, on the bay side of the road, that's just one tactic that we can use. Obviously, if the bridge is replaced, there could be some coordination to elevate the bridge, get some additional clearance and take the roadway prism up. That's really the beauty of the approach for the project in general is we're building up a fill prism, which is very adaptable to future conditions. You just build it up wider. We're not maximizing our use of the right of way with this project. So we have additional horizontal space to increase the roadway prism vertically. So this is one last graphic to show you. This shows you the absolute minimum amount of berm that we would need to construct to make this portion of roadway adaptable and protected against conditions in the year 2100 plus. This assumes that that the existing bridge stays in its current configuration, that it's not elevated, so it's still a constraint. And this also assumes that we are able to actually elevate the rest of the roadway away from that bridge with additional fill prism because there are no other vertical constraints in that area. So assuming that there is still a vertical constraint in 80 years out from now, year 2100 plus, we could construct a berm that could be as short as about 100 feet long, assuming that we elevate the rest of the roadway. So this would essentially be a dip down under the bridge, and then you'd rise back up out of the bridge. Of course, you can use this same berm scenario. You could extend the berm quite a bit longer, as Chris had shown in a previous exhibit, as opposed to raising the roadway. But this is just for some context on some options that you could do to adapt the project in the future.
Okay, any questions on Paradise Drive?
No, looks like it's coming along and good analysis.
I had a question just in regard to how the roadway will be raised. Will the asphalt be removed, new lightweight fill brought in, and new asphalt surface?
So most likely the most cost effective is to remove the asphalt, bring it up with earth material, but whether that's lightweight or just engineered fill kind of still needs some analysis from a cost perspective.
Mhm.
And then come in with the final asphalt section.
Okay. And if we do go to the point where we need to use that berm, then we would really have to start putting in check valves to really keep the water from coming through at extreme high tides.
Yeah.
That could be done even with these large culverts.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. You would have to, with that kind of area collecting in the bottom, you would have to have some system in there to drain it.
Mhm.
So yeah, we'll have to make sure there's a reasonable approach there. I mean, there definitely is if you get to any sort of pump station, but obviously that can be expensive. Short of that, there might be a system of culverts with check valves or other things that are an option.
So, and also it does seem like the ditch, that's drainage swale ditch, will eventually sort of fill in, if we can't do anything, just with the vegetation, sediment build up, the capacity will get smaller and smaller. Is it possible to do some type of mitigation where we would widen the ditch, move it back south, I guess, not do the edge on it, so you wouldn't impact that wetland species, but yeah, you would widen it, and then wetland species would come back in again. Maybe you could create some additional wetlands as a part of expanding that, but it would seem like that's going to need to get done at some point.
Yeah, so I'll be careful. Just I'm not a biologist or environmental engineer, but been around enough these projects. So I mean, even in the scenario where you can take all those great sensitive plant species and shift them over, they're still considered a temporary impact until they actually regenerate and all that. So that's still an impact by the resource agencies, and they want you to do everything possible to avoid impacts. So really look at all of their scenarios. So you'd really have to come up with that purpose and need of the project can't be built and achieve the goals of the project unless you do that. And I just don't know at today's time that we're there. Perhaps in the future, if there's additional needs for that width that are severe or critical enough, then maybe an argument can be made at that time.
Could you create an additional ditch just south of that would then eventually connect into it? So you wouldn't be digging a ditch through wetland plants, but wetlands plants would populate it, and then that would spill in at the culvert to help with the drainage and sort of expand the drainage swale that you have.
Or alternatively, like, honestly, this is not very low impact development. It's not what agencies want, but from an engineering perspective, to like a box culvert underneath the elevated sidewalk and connect up and just abandon the existing drainage ditch. I know that we're still thinking ideas right now, but if you're trying to get the conveyance capacity, right, from the land side, right, connect up to the culvert and get that water out of there, then, and with all the constraints with working in the existing ditch, it's probably a 10-year permit process, let's say, right? And you're then going to be back there in 20 years trying to clean the ditch out again. You're kind of back to where you were. So is there an idea of just rethinking what to do about that drainage, right? And using the fact that you're going to be filling and maybe putting a box culvert or even a culvert underneath the sidewalk, right? And really solving the problem maybe over the long term.
No.
So it's an idea.
I think obviously to answer those questions, you'd want to know what the existing capacity is of the ditch and the existing capacity of the culvert that does go under the road. Do you know if the storm drain master plan is addressing the capacity of that ditch as looking at all the drainage out to the bay?
So they've done that analysis
Yeah.
and feel
They assumed some ditch capacity because it was some engineered trapezoidal channel at some point in its life, right?
and good.
Yeah, something to point out is as long as the ditch is hydraulically connected to the bay through those culverts, even if you provide additional ditch
Mhm.
capacity, you're gonna still have generally the same water surface elevation. You could
Right.
make the entire, inland area ditch. It's gonna equalize with the bay. So I think really the question becomes, when you're looking at these future scenarios, your 2100 beyond, do you have options and opportunities to raise those culverts up so that they are not backwatering from the
Mhm.
bay? I think that's really how you would solve the issue with the ditch. The ditch probably will lose capacity over time just because it does settle in. That could be mitigated, somehow, as RJ mentioned, it's very difficult to mitigate that sort of situation. That could help you with routine storm events. But once those culverts get underwater from the bay side, it doesn't matter to a large degree what you do upland. It's just going to equalize with the bay and you're going to have that same water surface elevation.
Yeah.
So it's sort of two different scenarios. Sea level rise is one thing that we're looking at here. The storm events where it's not underwater, some additional ditch capacity could help with that, but that's a very difficult project to undertake.
Yeah, Becky brought up a good point. That is a common strategy as things are grade with sediment is to raise the culverts over when they
Mhm.
are consistently filling up with sediment and
Mhm.
underwater. And that would be, any project that is going to have a lot of permits, but to come in 30 years from now and do a culvert specific project isn't. Likewise, if we build this and we see that the vegetation growth is really inhibiting the flows, we could go get permits for maintenance. Still a lot of permits and a lot of hoops to jump through, but you could do that and get the necessary approvals to go in.
Yeah, I know that in other areas, depending what the species are, you have to do a habitat conservation plan, but that may be something that the county as a whole needs to address for kind of all of its drainage infrastructure. I don't know if there's any movement to that, but kind of basically more broad permitting strategies, right, that can be applied. And that's, obviously got its own set of issues besides just getting a set of permits to do an individual project, but
Hi, this is Ramon. I have a question. Well, first, I appreciate the phase approach. I think it makes sense. It's very sensitive to increase the scope of the project as the need comes about. But along that line, I was hoping to see a longitudinal profile of the road in addition to the plan view that you show, just to see how that target elevation gets reached with time. And one of the reasons is to see how the vehicles will change grade along the roadway throughout each of these phases. Do you have something like that?
We do, and I don't know if you, we have the cross sections that we showed earlier. I don't know if you missed that or.
You know, the cross sections are perpendicular to the roadway, right?
Right. Okay, you would.
Longitudinal, I meant.
Yeah.
That's kind of what this serves.
Oh,
Yeah, but that is the plan view. That is the plan view.
Yeah.
Right. So if you have the longitudinal cross section, then you would see how, how you reach up and goes down.
So if you look at this plan view, we don't have the profile view, you're correct. We don't have that view to share here tonight. But if you were to look at this particular view and you focus your eye on up and away, or just over to the right where that pedestrian bridge is, start to think of this as a bullseye. That pedestrian bridge is the lowest spot. And then as you move several feet out, you go sort of up contour, and then you move further and further out, you continue to go up. So it's really like a bowl shape here. So you would see the profile is the highest over at Westward. It drops down to that lowest over by the pedestrian bridge, and then it begins to elevate, off image here. But as you approach Robin Drive, and it's not perfectly symmetrical, but you can use that sort of bullseye analogy to get an idea of what that generally looks like.
Yeah, I guess I was going, concerned with the traffic light line of sight, right? I assume that we will be improving that, right? But for drivers who can see, I mean, I don't know if you're gonna go into a bump and then go down, right? Or what sort of transition there is in mind.
Vertically, we're actually leveling it all off.
Right. So it would be a net improvement.
Yeah.
Got it. Still, I think it's a valid, drawing to have. Now, another question is, you guys get to check with the town's attorney with respect to the improvements considered, both raising the road and the potential berm or levee that you're thinking. The concern being that I guess that the egress right away public property takes precedent over private property, but the concern would be that the school will claim that because of the city works, the flooding has gotten worse in their area, in their school, right? Which is also, there's children there.
We'll look at that as part of the design process, as just kind of common practice. The schools, as far as I'm aware, are at 15 feet or elevation or more. So it's not as if the road being elevated to 11.6 is gonna worsen that condition for them. But maybe there's something else I'm missing about the comment.
Their fields, their property is gonna be if we put a berm there, it's gonna prevent some of the water to migrate onto the roadway and beyond. So you're gonna create a levee, right? So I mean, you don't need to bring you don't need to build a very tall levee. You just need your levee to be taller than the neighbors. The old saying.
Yeah, I guess maybe I'm missing it, right? Because if berm is on the inside of the fields, so by that point the fields are well inundated, but I guess there's a point I'm not connecting on. But I'm happy we can continue and get to the bottom of it here, or I'm happy to sidebar this and discuss further if I'm missing the point.
No problem. We can talk about it at a different time. Thank you.
Thank you.
I've got a quick question. The exception, or was it an exception or exemption to get, is it proposed to Caltrains, or who's the?
No, it's a standard process, right? So when you follow the standard, that's where you're safest. Anything happens for any number of reasons, follow the standard, you're very low liability. When you deviate, that's when you have some risk. So, truck comes through and hits the bridge, then obviously that's a big problem. And we would be culpable depending on where we put the road height. Given this design exception still would have been standard if it was a vehicle bridge above, that gives us enough confidence to propose that as an option.
I guess my point, we feel confident because everything seems to be linchpinned on that. We're confident we can proceed with that.
So it's not, we don't have to apply for it, but it's something that goes on record and that we sign off on, and should something happen, that gets drummed up for the lawyers.
RJ, Chris, I had a thought in relationship to the bridge. It's been there as long as I can remember, so that's going back 40 years. And if it was replaced, would it have to be an ADA acceptable bridge with ramps for wheelchair?
It's a good question. I'm not an expert when it comes to ADA for private entities. My suspicion is it would, given it's school, but definitely if it was a public bridge, it would need to be, right? And in some ways, we're actually the counter option there is to have an alternative ADA path of travel, which this project is actually providing for them by having enhanced crosswalks at street level. This is something similar, familiar on Sir Francis Drake over by Wolfgrade and the basic school there. They have a similar pedestrian overcrossing. And when they did the paving project, it triggered ADA compliance. They documented an alternative path of travel at the roadway level to still maintain that bridge structure, which is used with stairs. Doesn't mean that they won't ever get sued over it, but they felt confident enough to proceed.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Becky.
All right.
Thanks, Becky.
So the second discussion item was the Marina Village Retention Pond maintenance schedule, and I believe this was a request in a previous meeting. So I dug into the lagoon maintenance policy and spoke to our maintenance staff and figured out exactly what they're doing every year. So so year round, there's a flood control gate adjacent to Channel Drive, and our maintenance staff just leave it cracked open. So at high tide, the water seeps through and helps, it'll cycle the pumps, and then it will kind of flush the retention pond. So it reduces algae and the bad smells that go with stagnant water. And then so they leave that open year round, and then the retention pond is pumped down completely during the fall and spring maintenance periods, and that's third week of October and first week of April. So, and then in the winter, the pond's kept at an elevation of negative 3.5 feet, and they pump it down to negative 5.5 feet before large storms. And then the summer, it's kept around an elevation of negative 3 feet. And I don't believe those elevations are on any sort of datum. They're just they're on this, they're all of our pumps, lagoons are on an assumed datum, but they're all tied together. So the elevations don't really mean a lot, but that's just where they're set at. And that's basically the annual schedule. So
And Marina Village is just back there, right?
So this is the retention basin off San Clemente Drive,
Okay.
right across from storage and the bike shop there and the CHP.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you.
So I have never completely understood what the retention pond does. It's been explained to me in the past that you can both pump into it and pump out of it depending on, flood conditions. And the valve that's checked for San Clemente Creek to keep that open, there's just a trickle of water that goes through that, even at very high tides. I mean, as you look in that basin, there's just a thin rim or a thin stream around the edge. So it doesn't create wetlands in there. It's just this little channel that goes down and then does drain into the retention pond. So I guess I'm trying to get a handle on, well, what's the purpose of that? What is it doing? And then how does this whole thing work for flood protection from a big rainstorm?
So yeah, I'll take the simple answer is without it, Marina Village, those streets would be very challenged to drain, right? Because that is a low fill development, right? Where they're, I don't, in the closer to the range of 6 or 7 foot elevation, and they were gravity flowed into the retention basin that's lower, and then are pumped over to Shorebird and so on. Whereas Marina Cove, high fill and goes to the bay. So I mean, if you drive around during a storm and you go through Marina Village, Marina Cove, it's not intuitive. You would think that Marina Village is actually higher because you see less water and ponding, but it's actually much lower and flows gravity to the retention pond or retention basin and then flows out. Separate of that, it also, on a more complicated level, it does take in water from other watersheds as well. And some of this we're gonna come back and do a more thorough explanation as we get further in the storm drain master plan process.
As you look at the size of the watershed for Marina Village, it does seem like this is a really huge pump system and detention pond to take care of that. The other point and the other thing that really protects Marina Village is the levee that's out there along the bay that we've sandbagged in the past. Those sandbags have deteriorated at this point. Do we have a plan to, put new bags out and get that level up? Because that outer levee, is not much above 8 at a low spot.
Want to touch on what we talked about?
Yeah, so we, as part of the master plan, one of the items was to have a consultant go around and survey critical locations. And so we marked that as one of them that we'd like them to check. We're going to have them leave a survey point somewhere that we can reference in the future, and then also just try and find the lowest spot on the levee so that we know if it is actually at risk. So that's the plan. That should be coming up in the next few weeks.
Okay, good. Yeah, I've seen at really high tides, the water being within a foot of the top of that low spot out there. So I think the sandbags are a necessary temporary step with the longer term plan, raising the levee.
So I'll take credit or blame. I brought this up because I was really curious. I walk by this pond. It's in my hood almost daily, and this is really helpful. Thanks. But I'm still curious because maybe I'm not observing correctly, but I see daily change in that elevation. So yeah, maybe it's being pumped in or out. So I don't want to delve into it. It's not a problem. Just really curious.
So the second source besides Marina Village is it's connected to these major culverts under San Clemente, and they collect water from across the freeway, from Granada Park, like a large portion of town. So it collects a lot of water, and that water can either gravity flow to Shorebird Marsh or it can go into the pond. So it's very likely it's just water cycling in there, maybe from some other source coming from the bay, coming around and going back in. So
yeah, and the other thing I don't know off the top of my head is, right, the set point might be, well, this to -3.5, but how many feet does it let it build up before the pumps fire up? Because they're not running 24/7. They let it store and then they.
Thank you.
Any other questions before we move on? Okay. So now we have a few project updates. There's the Lucky Drive Culvert Repair, the Climate Adaptation Assessment update, Storm Drain Master Plan, and the San Clemente Pump Station outfall pipe repair. So starting with Lucky Drive. Town staff recently finished a repair on one of the 4 culverts that go under Lucky Drive, just west of the Corte Madera courtyard. That's like a major junction that, you know, drains High Canal and a lot of the lagoons in town. So Caltrans completed an underwater inspection of the culvert in February 2021. They actually sent divers in to check all the pipes and the joints, and they noticed a large gap in between 2 of the reinforced concrete pipe segments, and it was eroding the soil around the pipes. So they give us a recommended repair that is not as recommended as it sounds. They want you to do it pretty quickly. And so the town ordered several hydrotight seals, which are basically gaskets that go on the inside of the pipe and seal around the inside. And so we had a contractor install 4 of them on any of the joints that looked like they were starting to open up, and then especially the one that had a big hole in it. And so those are clamped down and they seal the holes and should protect the pipes for the near future. So that one is working well now.
And just to clarify, so Caltrans gets involved because the culverts are at a bridge structure. So even though you may have bridges within, and we don't have, I think we only have,
That's the only one.
I think it's that one and maybe that Ped Bridge at Sandra Marker.
Oh, yeah.
Are the only 2 that are in the town system, but they will come and inspect those despite them not being in Caltrans jurisdiction.
They have there's a minimum span where it gets included in the highway bridge.
So
program.
whether it's a culvert or an actual bridge, any span of 20 feet or more is eligible and defined as a bridge by Caltrans. And if it's not on their list already, you can add it. And they will include it as part of routine inspections.
I just also wanted to ask just about that area that has been flooding at high tides. And I know there's a plan to try to do something about that very low section that floods. What's being done on that? Is it something you can elaborate on now?
Yeah, we worked with the county to submit an application for FEMA grant funds it would be a pretty large project to raise the road, and we'd have to fix basically rebuild a lot of the storm system over there. And we're not successful with that grant, so we've kind of put that project on hold because we're mainly focusing on Paradise right now. But that will be one in the future. It's also listed in the Climate Adaptation Assessment. So
yeah, I mean, we weren't successful in this opportunity, but I think we did get some positive feedback. So it's something that we could end up pursuing again, but something we also wanted to really understand before putting such a big project forward, because it really was going to be a $4+ million project once you really look at all the factors. We wanted to look also at this just on the pump station side of things and through the storm drain master plan. Is there any subtle or more cost-effective solutions by upgrading our pump station or upgrading the culverts or the force mains that tie in that pump station to come up with a solution for this? Because something just isn't, there's something going on there that there very much could be an easier solution. And we're crossing our fingers, but we're hoping to cover that a little bit.
Just one, on the FEMA, I know that we worked, Chris, a little bit on that together. And I think it's still worth looking kind of bigger picture, because the FEMA funding can be very favorable if you can get over the benefit cost analysis threshold, but they'll pay 75% of a project. So it lets you do a bigger project, right? If you're able to kind of put all the pieces together, but it's not an insignificant effort. So I totally understand that.
And the other challenge was, if we were successful, you have 3 years only to have complete community support and construct it and build it, which, so I think we want to get our ducks in a row.
Yeah, be really ready when you apply, but there is the Building Resilient Infrastructure Program, which is some of the several, kind of different FEMA programs. And because of the climate resilience nexus, I think you could come up with a good project. It's going to take some work, and it's going to take some pre-work to really be able to live within that timeline, right? That's the thing, is being so ready enough that you can really take advantage of it. So.
Would the county of Marin be involved in that project? Is across the other side of Lucky Drive, is that Corte Madera, or is that county of Marin?
So we did, as part of that one application, did partner with them, submit a joint application. And so we would be open to that in the future.
So back to the Culver Repair. This is just a few pictures of the work that went on. They they accessed it from the inboard side at low tide, and then just installed. They had to clean all the stuff out of the inside of the pipe and then installed them. So they're able to do it in one day, which is pretty impressive. Okay. Move on to the climate adaptation assessment.
Unsure.
Yeah.
Great. So I think this has been a request a couple times, and so wanted to go through and just kind of go back to our climate adaptation assessment from May of 2021. So feels like a long time ago, but in some ways it wasn't. Just about a year and a half or so. I did want to bring this up. Hopefully everyone knows where to find this. It's still available online at cortemaderaadapts.org. But I wanted to focus on just kind of the flood board related sections. So right here are the table of contents, and the ones that I wanted to cover with you all. Oh, I put the asterisk in the wrong spot, were just the shoreline, and then also the central Corte Madera, and just kind of see what the document said at that time, and kind of the progress that's been made since, and then we can open it up for questions. So I'm really just going to flip through. I've added some notes along the way. The screen in a good spot. So just stats on the shoreline. Hopefully everyone has had a chance to at least skim through this, familiarize with it. But a big chunk of Corte Madera is in the vulnerable area for sea level rise and flooding. So it goes with our bayfronting neighborhoods, but also our central inland ones, such as Madera Gardens. The document, talked about some of the things that we were just looking at, the different sea level rise guidance metrics, low and medium high risk. There's plenty of good information here. I won't go into this ad nauseum, but I did want to focus on kind of the back end of these sections, which have kind of the actions, so to speak. So just flipping through, right, there was a lot of connectivity showing the county's sea level rise vulnerability here on the right side. That's another document that we use as part of shaping our town specific climate adaptation assessment. Talks about other areas, not just from, flooding from the sea level side, but right, inland stormwater and runoff, and strategies to, at a small level, even a parcel level, a residence level of low impact development, to take that water and kind of delay the time at which it all goes to the culvert at the same time during that big rains. And so that's a strategy that's kind of discussed throughout. Groundwater as sea level rises, what happens to the infrastructure that we have currently today. Our pipes are underground, so they're more likely to be inundated over time. So kind of having plans in place to really understand those and address them ahead of when they become big problems. Just some conceptual ideas on how to deal with rising sea level. Get into these, but can answer questions if needed. And then really here is kind of, this is kind of a two-part. So one is, on the accommodation side, what are some of the things that the town is doing or has worked on since this went through? And so zoom in a little bit. Right, so talks about at the time we had a class 7 EMS CRS rating. We've now improved to 6, right? So additional benefits for our flood taxpayers. We're actually just finishing up the 5-year audit right now. So far, it's looking pretty good, but there's a lot of work that's gone into kind of making sure all of our documents are there and everything's the way FEMA wants it. Here's one, right? Partner with community to enhance understanding of sea level rise science projections. So there's a whole list of things going on, not just here in Corte Madera, the county, but broader. For one, I attend these Bay Wave steering committees, which is a group of elected officials and representatives from really all of the agencies in Marin, and they collaborate and try to plan on how best to kind of move this forward for the greater good of the overall county. Marin, the county is working on a Marin sea level rise viewer, which in a lot of ways is kind of think of it as Marin map if you're familiar with it, but focused on sea level rise. So that I think they're hoping to launch here in the next 6 months, which will be great on the education side for everyone. We have an open recruitment for a climate action and adaptation coordinator. So hopefully that's providing, that designated person who really can focus on action and adaptation in town of Corte Madera and really do that, detailed work. There's so much going on that it really does take a full-time person to really track everything at the level it needs to happen. And then so it's open until filled. So you could technically still submit, but we have started the interview process. We've covered Paradise Complete Streets and some of the other projects that are moving forward. Those are some of those ongoing efforts. Some of these in the middle we haven't yet gotten to, but moving down to the bottom, provide regulatory assistance to property owners by streamlining zoning regulations and development permitting process to enhance the resilience of home and property. So Bob perhaps can speak to it as his duties and roles on the planning commission, but there's some ongoing design review changes being considered, one of which really does kind of look to streamline and assist people with development in the floodplain, right? If you exceed 50% of the value of your structure, you're then triggered to lift your home, but then at the same time, current practices, you then have to go to design review because of the increased height. And so they're really trying to smooth that along. And I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, and this was from the planning staff. They just kept track of problem areas. In particular, people had to get a variance because they were raising their house, even if they weren't doing anything else to it, because it was going above 15 feet. And they always got the variance, but there were some delays and it would, it cost some money and it was just another permit issue. But since it was always approved, their recommendation to the planning commission was that, we eliminate that, that if all you're doing is raising your house, to be above flood stage, you don't have to get a variance to do that. So it's just a simple permit. And I believe they're also going to say, as long as you're only adding 250 square feet or less, to the house, which you would end up doing with decks and new entranceway and things like that, you don't have to get a special permit for that. That's a expedited type of permit. So I think it was really impressive that the planning staff looked at what are problems for people and then proposed some solutions to eliminate those problems, simplify it, make it go faster, save some money. So, yeah, I'm really pleased and excited that
So that's, yeah, in the works and moving forward, it looks like. We touched on Lucky Drive, we touched on Paradise. Again, some work's been done on Lucky Drive, but still more work to do. And then Paradise Drive, on top of the design work that's been done, we did apply for a construction or grants for construction through OBAG 3, which is a grant cycle. And we're at this moment, the last project that didn't make it in the ranking because much of that program was slated for disadvantaged communities. But it still got really positive remarks. And so there's a chance that if one of the higher projects gets funding from another source, there's a couple that are on there for another grant ATP. And if they do get the ATP, then our project could slide up and get funded. So either way, it's got a lot of support behind it countywide. I know through the process, there was a lot of dialogue about kind of different concepts for Marina Cove and Marina Village. Those concepts, the detailed concepts did not make it into the final accepted version of this plan. Rather, what was mentioned was, and we'll touch on the next page, is more of just kind of commitment to, once this proceeds, to do more outreach, and I'll touch on it in a page or two. This had a case study on levee improvements at Foster City. That's, obviously one of the larger projects in the Bay Area that has proceeded. So Chris and I and Adam Wolf were fortunate enough to get a tour of that several months ago, and it was very impressive and learned a lot. And it's primarily a sheet pile wall, but and it's definitely not a complete match to any sort of residential neighborhood that we have, but at the same time, there are some similarities and learned a lot. So that was productive. We're tracking kind of the best practices when it comes to nature-based solutions and all of those other concepts that are out there. We still have SFEI on call as needed as things come up. Really looking at the Marsh and Railroad, we see that as a project that needs to happen one day, but I think most part that was more of a 10-foot elevation right away, so not something that is right on the cusp of needing to move forward with the project, but so that's in here. Obviously just kind of working and strengthening our relationships with the other agencies. So here, I mentioned there's just all sorts of scientific studies and policies and regulations, and down here I tried to copy and paste some in, and I'm happy to share those via email or put them on our flood board webpage. But these are some recent documents that have been published that just speak to this sea level rise issue and what some of the other agencies are doing. So, BCDC, SFEI, and another BCDC have these documents that really I would hope to send to our future climate adaptation and action coordinator to really get to the details of it and help us move this along. The other one I listed here, San Mateo 1 shoreline, is what San Mateo County is doing, and they're really looking at more of an overlay zoning type approach. So something interesting as well. I think that's being discussed regionally. Like I mentioned, constantly coordinating with our other agencies here in Marin on what's going on, and everyone's very driven, motivated, and wants to do what's best for the county. So we're always trying to help each other and try to push the envelope. Tying back to the Marina Cove, Marina Village, this is kind of what was left with kind of next steps, at the time that things do get brought up again, it's really re-engaging and getting a good sense of what everyone's goals are and determining if we have the full support of our community. We did have some kind of mixed feedback during that process, and I think some of it was based on some misinformation. It'd be nice to get some kind of feedback based on kind of accurate and neutral information, but I think that's kind of where we stand at the moment. But I don't know exactly where it is on the timeline of things. So I can keep going and then we can come back to questions at the end, but I think this is the last of this section, and then moving on to Central Corte Madera, right? So, more of the areas that are kind of inland, but still have a flood control component. Madera Gardens comes to mind with the lagoons and other things. It talks about groundwater levels, and right, as sea levels rise, what's going to happen, right? We're going to have underground utilities that are impacted. We're going to have structural foundations that are now, in wet subgrade that weren't, all sorts of things that could happen that we need to understand and include as part of, when we look at future infrastructure. And so as we've had opportunities, and I can think of a couple, we have already established some of these monitoring wells. We have a couple now in Granada, because when we're drilling for geotechnical analysis, we can then convert that to a future groundwater well. So we have a couple, and as part of our recent sewer work down over at kind of Granada Park area. And then also PG&E is gearing up to do a big gas transmission project on Tamla Vista, and we have approached them and have them agreed to convert some of those to groundwater monitoring wells. So, and we'll continue that as we see opportunities. So in the future, we have those as locations we can get data points from. Down at the bottom, it talks about just green infrastructure and reducing impervious hard surfaces, and Chris, you may want to talk about kind of just LID and kind of your experience with that.
Yeah, so a lot of it is just required by the water board, but depending on the project, whether it's public or private, you have to incorporate LID in the project to treat a certain amount of stormwater off impervious. And a lot of times it depends how much new impervious you're building or rebuilding. So
really it's kind of two main goals. One, so right, when you have rainfall that, I think years past would go straight into either hardscape or straight into the storm system, there's no opportunity for the soil to collect some of those contaminants that may be in it. Secondly, all that water goes straight into the flood control system, and it creates this big peak flow right at the same time. And so if you're able to run some of that water through soil, it slows down. All that water doesn't reach your culverts and your flood control system at the same time, so it reduces the peak at the same time, improving water quality.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, that was kind of a similar action item with the same kind of idea. This is something that we coordinate through Marin County Stormwater Pollution and Prevention Program. We did have an action item regarding the flooding that this historically occurred at the Jeep and now Tesla dealership. So we did add, is it 1 or 2 storm drains along that section?
We had a new storm drain and enlarged a section of the pipe it went from, I think, a 12-inch to an 8-inch and then back to a larger one. But so we kind of fixed that smaller section.
Right. And so I think it still has some, during big events, it still has some inundation, but much better than it was before. And so that's something we'll continue to monitor, especially ahead of our Casablanca Complete Streets project. See if there's any further improvements or refinements we need to make. Breakout case study. Here is where it kind of talks about storm drain master plan. So Chris, maybe oh, we'll get to that. That's the next item. So we'll save some of that. We already talked about kind of low impact development, LID. And we do track that. So as, for instance, with in particular commercial or properties or regulatory projects, say Restoration Hardware or the gravel lot, the formerly gravel lot, Nordstrom's paved lot, when they do those developments, they have to design to account for those low impact development areas, usually through like bioswales and stuff. And we document the size, the location, and then they have to actually go and record them with the county through a maintenance agreement, which basically means they are required to maintain it forever. And it crosses ownership. So it runs with the land. Otherwise, we don't have anything contractually to keep those facilities in place. So we do have a tracking system. That is something that actually FEMA has been auditing and looks at and make sure that we're tracking, we're holding them accountable as part of even the CRS process.
Yeah, and so far it's been mostly commercial properties that we've installed the devices like bioswales, but I think in the future we'll probably try and incorporate them in our own projects. We are excused a lot of times because we're building, I think when you build like pedestrian and bicycle facilities, they don't count that as new impervious. Unlike like if you expand a road, they would consider that, and then you'd have to incorporate that. But it's always just tough to find space for those kinds of things because you have to usually put them between the sidewalk and the road, and always limited on right-of-way space.
Yeah, we are looking at opportunities for that as part of Paradise Streets project. That is the end of that section. So with that, I will open it up for questions on the climate adaptation assessment progress.
So it sounds like the coordinator that's kind of somebody's going to be hired would be a person to kind of help organize and move things forward. Is that a safe statement?
Yeah. Obviously, till that person is here and we know exactly their skill set.
Right.
We don't know for sure, but there's definitely a lot of climate action related goals and initiatives out there that they would be pushing along. Typically, these people have kind of more of a planner background, which is more suited for climate action and less suited for adaptation. But nonetheless, that person could be a great spokesperson or educator or representative related to adaptation concepts, but then still rely on the engineering team for projects and kind of technical background. So
no, because I think that sounds like a great way to kind of advance this initial work, right? Because it really was initial work, and there's a long road ahead. So having some structure to that as we go forward would be really good.
And so what's the process for amending this document, specifically around sea level rise projections that are based on the California state document, and they are going to periodically update that? So how do we make sure that we're all going off the projections that we're supposed to?
It's a good question. I think, I think if there was a substantial enough reason to revise it, I think we would. And I think we'll probably get in a cycle of revising it every 10 years or so. Yeah. But I think it would first start with the reason for revising it versus.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting it needs it. Like I've looked at other projections out there, like NOAA put out new updated sea level rise predictions, as did the Army Corps, and they're very close to what California had. So over many years, it's hardly changed. But that could mean refining our estimates of where things are going, and maybe it's not going to be as wide a spread for instance, the 5% probability. If these predictions keep proving to be exactly right, maybe we can start designing to something a little closer to the actual projected values, but that's a big discussion to have in the future.
I thought the climate assessment, adaptation assessment was really very well done. We had good consultants in that. I thought they did a really first-rate job. Were the proposals or possible solutions for flooding in Mariner Cove, were they pulled from the document? The tidal gates and the berms and such?
So the detailed level documents were pulled from the final version. So I think they might have snippets and some dependencies and whatnot, but yeah.
But we still have those. It's just that we didn't put that out because there was so much pushback about the idea of a seawall. I think the timing, was sort of unfortunate on it. That big study and what was done at Foster City, I think, the next month in the paper, that was headlines about the levees that they were doing and creating there, and several other large projects. And I think once homeowners realize that a living shoreline can only do so much, and there isn't any magic tricks that you or Chris have or the consultants have to solve these problems, we can look at us pulling that document back out and doing a staged approach to it, where everybody doesn't need a 3 or 4 foot seawall in their back of their house. A number of the people that complained the most were probably not going to need a seawall for decades. But I thought it was a good document. I think that's what we'll probably end up doing, because I just, don't see any alternatives to protect the homes that are in Mariner Cove and Marina Village. Marina Village is, as we talked about, is protected by the levee and the detention pumps or retention pump station.
Okay, any other questions? Okay. Moving on.
Back to. Okay. So, we give an update on the storm drain master plan. We are a few months in now, and Schaff and Wheeler are continuing their work. They're currently the overall phase is system inventory, condition assessment, and asset management phase. So the current tasks that are either complete or ongoing are data collection. Basically, we provided them with all of our as-builts and record documents, whatever we could dig up, and they went through and analyzed it all and figured out what they needed for this process. The infrastructure inventory, SKL Solutions was a sub-consultant who's working on our GIS system. And so they basically had to start from scratch because it was so outdated that it really couldn't be salvaged. So, and we had several old GIS maps in different types that they had to combine together. So basically they started fresh, and they're going to be using all this information to put together a new GIS that will be much more accurate, which will be nice.
So just, yeah, in lay terms, right, we want all of our information in a computer software where we can click on pipe segments and get pipe type, condition, diameter, and then they can use that and further and model specific areas and see where we have.
Yeah, we want to get to like a preventative maintenance stage instead of kind of right now we're just reacting when there's issues. So ideally, that's where we'll get to after the storm drain master plan. And then I believe it was Kieran Wright did a drone survey of the 6 lagoons and High Canal. And so I have some visuals from that. It's pretty interesting. And so they're currently analyzing that information, and they're trying to figure out what the capacity of all the lagoons is. And if they've had, I mean, one goal is to figure out if we'll need to dredge them eventually or right now. So hopefully we'll figure that out from that process. And then topside condition assessment is mostly complete. Schaff Miller went around for 3 weeks and basically looked in catch basins, manholes, storm drains, and documented everything they saw. And I have some pictures from that. And so right now they're just analyzing all the data they took. They have like a 3D GoPro, so they stick it in and you can like see everything inside. And then the
Basically want to find the old corrugated, corroded metal pipes before it becomes a problem. And so that's the efficient way to do that. And then some, there's gonna be a small sliver of those that they look inside and they'll see something that looks odd, but it's gonna need CCTV. It's gonna need to be videoed all the way through. And so we have an allocation set aside for those follow-ups.
Yeah, the next slide has some info on like what they found around town. And then the last item currently underway is the pump station condition assessment. They went around with some of our maintenance team and went to all the pump stations and floodgates and checked them out and gathered all the information they needed to provide recommendations for what work we'll have in the future. So this is a pretty zoomed out visual, but this was what they put together after they did their topside assessment. And so the green dots were ones that they were able to look in. They had no problems. The yellow dots were either full of water or there was something wrong that they couldn't access it. And then I believe trying to remember, red dots that they had issues finding the catch basin they're looking for, which really speaks to how bad our maps are, because I mean they show stuff that was moved or doesn't exist anymore. So we got a lot of work to do, but that was kind of the goal of this. So they're recording all that information, and some of these that they weren't able to inspect, they will be sending the CCTV crew out to take a closer look. And we're hoping to line it up with our fall lagoon maintenance period when they're going to be emptying all the lagoons. So a lot of those pipes will be able to be accessible at that point. So they sent me a few slides of things they saw around. So, top left, it was a corrugated metal pipe that's the bottom is pretty rusted out, and I think within a year or two it'll probably be completely gone. So they're going to flag things like that for us, and we can put together larger projects to fix that. Top right, just losing aggregate, the concrete's getting really old in some of these catch basins, and even the reinforced concrete pipes are starting to fall apart a bit. Bottom left, the pipe was full of water, so they couldn't really see much, but you can tell that, there's issues with where the pipe goes into the catch basin. And then the bottom right, that was some sort of plastic liner that's now failing and coming delaminated from the pipe it was installed in. So that's one that we'll have to look at before long. And then just a few more, the top left, that one is a corrugated metal pipe that's just completely gone. There's just nothing left on the bottom half of it. Top right is just, another pipe that's full of water. Same with bottom left. And then the bottom right looks like, I don't know, just a failing pipe. Looks like the joint is offset there along with other problems. So a lot of issues to deal with in the near future. So this was some visuals from the drone survey. The right side is kind of a more zoomed out version, so you can't really see Unfortunately, even we timed this with the spring lagoon maintenance, so they had pumped those lagoons down as much as they could, but there was still, I mean, it was all water, so that's why you don't see any like topographic lines on Lagoon 1 and 2. On the bottom left, that's the Marina Village detention basin, so you can kind of see that one was more empty, so it's more obvious to tell you know, all the elevations. And the one thing they did mention on, oh, I guess those, well, they labeled the lagoons differently than there actually are, but the one thing they mentioned is that, you know, because we pumped the lagoons down to the bottom and there was no, nothing showing, no like land coming out of the water, that probably there's still, I mean, we won't really need to dredge them because it won't increase the capacity. You know, as they fill up, it's just going to go up from there. So that was actually a good sign.
Yeah, so some more analysis on that we'll need to get into, but you could think of it as a bathtub where the drain is not at the bottom, it's several inches up from the bottom. So digging deeper doesn't necessarily increase the volume.
Storage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's some more dialogue on that and some more analysis. You know, we'll look at what's going on in the perimeter and see if there's anything there. But that's the preliminary feedback.
Yeah. So these are some images from the drone, and it's tough to see, but if you look closely, it's actually, you can see the dot matrix where it was collecting data. It just basically takes like millions of dots that give it the elevation and location. So, you know, they just flew around town and it just gathered data in all the waterways. And I actually have a little video. I'm not sure, hopefully it'll work on.
Days were they out there with the drone?
I think it was only 2 days, maybe. It was pretty quick. Okay. Let's see. It's not going to be very smooth, but you can see as it flies around, it's just like taking, I'm sure this is sped up quite a bit. They probably went really slow because of the amount of data it has to collect, but it just basically has like, I think it's LiDAR, but yeah, it just picks up like every little contour as it goes down.
Yeah, the version on Chris's computer is moving
A lot more
kind of
smoothly.
slow motion real time, whereas this one is kind of
Jumping around.
shot screen by screen.
Yeah. Anyways, it's pretty interesting stuff. So we're looking forward to getting their full report once they finish analyzing all the data. Yeah, and so the top left is Pixley Lagoon, top right is High Canal, and then bottom left was Shorebird Marsh, and then the bottom right's Lagoon 1. So the upcoming tasks, so I mentioned this before, but Kieran Wright is going to survey several locations around town and basically install like our personal benchmarks that we can use to monitor the elevation, sea level rise, settlement, and we can even, you know, synchronize the lagoon levels. So that's going to be really helpful.
Yeah, so I would redefine them as reference points. But
Yeah.
For instance,
Yeah.
you know, we have our sewer pump station at Golden Hide and Ebb Tide, and if we know what is the elevation of the manhole, or you know, the edge of the structure or slab that's nearest the bay, you know, as you're there walking your dog, seeing the tide, and you know that, and then you can kind of understand better what's going on. And so we have that location. We've got, you know, there's a head wall over by the fire station off Paradise Drive. Because I've seen that water level come up pretty high. We mentioned we want to get it's kind of a trailhead where I think it's Echo Harbor kind of meets Marina Village Levee and kind of getting some points there. And then again, over by the lagoons. But if you guys know those, kind of just helps you piece it together as you're out there and seeing, oh, hey, we got a 7.3 tide coming up in December 10th. Well, let's go stand there and see what it looks like.
Take a picture too, right? You know what that.
Just hopefully just further all of our understanding and education. Sea level elevations.
Yeah, so the second one, our consultant scopes like 2 weeks of CCTV work to further investigate after their topside condition assessment. So that's going to be coming up. I think they're going to do that at the same time as the fall lagoon maintenance. So this one is, like I said before, they did the topside assessment, so they need to analyze all the pictures and videos they collected. And then they'll have they'll basically have a report that says, you know, which pipes are which conditions and which ones need attention the soonest. So that will be coming up soon. SKL Solutions is going to use basically all the data they collected and incorporate all that into our GIS database. So hopefully we'll have new storm system maps coming up. And then one of the items was historic settlement analysis. So Miller Pacific is going to dig into the historic data to analyze settlement and then predict future settlement, mainly in Mariner Cove and Marina Village. In the future. So
On that one, probably revised version of seen in the past.
So that's what's coming up in the near future. The latest schedule shows the entire process or project being done basically by the end of next year. So by December 2023, we should have the final master plan document.
Yeah, and so all this information eventually comes into actual capital improvement program, you know, draft plan with budget scenarios. And so we'll come to flood board and it's, hey, we want to get all of our, where there's going to be a whole scale of different conditions of, for instance, just pipes, and to get all the structural rating 3, 4, and 5s in the next 10 years, you know, what does that cost, and kind of build that into a funding plan and a CIP plan. Or do we just want to focus on the 4s and 5s, and then same idea with really everything, pump station, retention basins, and all the above.
You have a question?
I was just going to ask, when they're looking at the capacities of the pipes and pumps, are they looking at the subwatersheds, upgrading from those and calculating the probabilities of exceeding those flows? Like how big of a storm is going to overtop this facility?
I believe so. Yeah, they're planning. I mean, they're figuring out the capacity of the lagoons themselves, but they're also going to be analyzing the watersheds and running analysis on like you know, certain level storms. So I believe they're going to provide that information.
So they'll actually highlight, you know, right, based on this network of pipes and pump station, this location is, you know, likely to have surface inundation at 10-year level, and you really wanted it at 25. It's going to go around and pinpoint.
That'd be perfect, and it'll be good for the existing system, but also if and when there's more structures at the bay side, water might not be leaving the land side in the same places, and it'll be great information if water has to move and consolidate to a single station. But having that information, you can just do the arithmetic and say, we need to move all this water over there and pump it all through San Clemente, for instance. So that'll be really important. And it was done in the past in '99, and it'd be interesting to see how close those calculations are to the old calculations.
Yeah, and really just to kind of, you know, just credit technology and where it's come and talking to not just this consultant, but the one that we didn't end up selecting. They both just said that the technology and the software and all the modeling stuff they're using these days is just so far beyond what they had available in 1999. So that by itself is really going to make this a better final product. I think a lot of the other prior stuff was a lot of manual. So to speak.
So you said that the final will come by the end of 2023?
That's the current schedule. I mean, there's always a chance of delays, but
Yeah, that's the goal. I think if there was any slowing in that process, it's really going to be the public process, really deliberating and discussing the CIP, options and scenarios.
Yeah, that's, I guess, where I was going. So we'll get a draft first, and the idea is to share the draft with stakeholders and maybe even subject matter experts to collect comments and then implement those comments in the final. Is
Yeah,
it
we'll have a more focused presentation to flood board. Once we have more information with the consultant here, and they'll go into a deeper dive. We'll publish the draft document for a comment period. We'll discuss it with council as well. So it'll go through all those stages.
when is that draft expected according to the schedule? Like it can change, but
I don't know off the top of my head. I would guess fall of next year. It's kind of one of the last items, but I don't know off the top of my head. Sorry.
no problem. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and we'll likely get kind of chunks. It sounds like we'll probably get the pipe condition assessment, next 6 months, but that's just one piece of the overall flood control infrastructure, right?
Yeah. No, it's not uncommon when you have different components to get kind of technical memorandum that eventually aggregate into a cohesive report.
Yeah, and there's gonna be things that we're gonna see that we're not gonna be able to wait on, or get these pipe condition reports. There's probably gonna be 5 or more segments that it's like, drop everything and take care of them right now.
One thing with the storm drain assessment, the elevations and everything, I think it'd be good to sort of focus and pin down on the levee that is on the west side of San Clemente Creek that protects harbor. That's never been clear to me who's responsible for maintaining that levee. It looks to be about at 9 feet, but that's what protects Marina Village from San Clemente Creek. Of course, the other levees on the other side are protecting it from the bay.
So this is if you're standing at the fire station looking across.
Yeah, but it's right. You have to get up a little ways till you can see it, but it's on the homes that are right on harbor. So it's the first couple, they seem to be a little bit higher, but there's just a berm behind 9 or 10 homes that are, it's not a very wide berm, and it's right there on the creek. So I don't think anybody that actually lives there, because when I've been out there on the water, I've sort of asked them, if there's a homeowner there, and they have no clue about it. Should they try to maintain it? Should they try to build it up? Or is this something the town would do at some point when sea level rise becomes a problem and a 9-foot levee isn't high enough?
Any other questions?
Oh, one other comment I want to make. You have created such great habitat at Shorebird Marsh that it's a treat watching those white pelicans, the cormorants, the egrets that are out there. It's really, really remarkable.
Prior decision makers.
Yeah. I don't think we'll be dredging there, so Okay, and then, yeah, the last project update is the San Clemente Pump Station outfall pipe repair project. So I think we may have touched on this in the last meeting, but we're continuing the work. Schaff and Wheeler, same consultant as our storm drain master plan, submitted their basis design memo in August, which we reviewed and approved. And so they're currently in the design process to prepare plan specs and estimate.
You want to recap, folks, just kind of when you're talking about the
Sure.
Watershed.
So yeah, the San Clemente pump station is one of our largest storm pump stations, and it collects water from basically Granada Park, kind of the south side of town up in the hills.
A lot from Meadow Sweet and crossing under the freeway.
Oh yeah, that's
Um,
right. Yeah.
But yeah, it's our largest storm drain pump station. And this is the one that we brought for you all at a flood board meeting where it's got a series of large pipes that enter into this manifold. So what size pipes?
That I forget the size that come out of the pump station,
Might
but
be 36 or 48, and they all convene into one larger, like 50. So it's one custom made manifold, 3 pipes into one. And there's several issues been going on. It's settling, it's pulling down on the building. So the side of the concrete mason unit building is cracking. The manifold where it connects to the pipe that discharges to San Clemente Creek. That connection was being weighed down so much that was starting to leak and fail. We've got corrosion issues. So, we had some kind of some leakage over the last winter that we experienced. And so we did some kind of temporary repairs on it, but we know it's a bigger problem. So we've had them gear up and do a more substantial design effort.
yeah, there was a sinkhole forms, which is how we found out about it. And it was before I started here, but apparently the same thing happened in 2016. And they basically did the same thing where they dug it up, kind of tried to seal it, and then just buried it. But then we had turnover, so kind of everyone forgot about it until it's happened again. So now we're looking for a permanent solution. And yeah, there's just a series of problems that we're trying to tackle all at the same time. So, but the main complication with the design is trying to plan for the future settlement, because I think I forget the exact number, but they're projecting another like 20 something inches of settlement for that pipe. And so to be able to have a coupling that can like stretch to that amount over the years has been really difficult to find, and is another reason why the next bullet point, the estimate has increased to about 1.7 million for this project. But that's including everything, including a large contingency.
Yeah, so the pump station structure foundation, right, is assumed to be built competently to not have settlement, whether it's on piers or it's been designed to float, so to speak, and not have any substantial settlement, whereas the pipe itself is dropping down. So it's just pulling down at this pump station, and over time it's causing cracks in the side wall of the pump station, and then pipes can only deflect so much before they start. And so even if you invest in these really expensive, custom, large parts, they still will only get you so far, and they likely won't handle 20 inches of settlement.
Yeah, and it doesn't help that the outfall pipe is a 52-inch reinforced concrete pipe on bay mud, so it's sinking fast. So yeah, that's the estimate has increased to a little less than 1.7 million, including everything. And so now we're expecting the final plan spec and estimate in mid-January, at which point we can bid the project. But a lot of the parts involved will have long lead times, so we're hoping to get it done next year, but it's just going to depend on how long all those lead times are. And that was it for that one. Just a quick update. Any questions about that project?
Yeah, one question is for the bidding. I wonder if you have in mind doing any sort of outreach to the potential contractors to keep them appraised of the project progress, so that we got a large enough pool of contractors bidding, and hopefully have a competitive environment.
Oh yeah, definitely. We try to email the advertisement out to everyone we know.
So, yeah, I mean, in addition, we sign up for, basically 6+
Bid exchanges or
yeah,
yeah.
builders exchanges, and they
exchange, yeah.
each have hundreds of contractors in their network, and whether they choose to bid on it or not, it's kind of their choice, but it really does get the word out. The other thing we do is, I think kind of what Ramon's referencing is just making sure contractors have notice. So making sure our bid period isn't too short, right? You put a project like this that has a lot of layers of supply issues and complications. If we only bid it for 21 days, we're going to miss out. So, point noted, and I think we'll definitely want to bid it for hopefully closer to a full 30 days. And if we can get the word out ahead of time, we will. It would have to be through some fair channel. So on our webpage, you wouldn't be able to, I don't think, email anyone in advance. That would give someone a leg up or an upper hand with bidding. So,
Right. Yeah, and another thing, obviously, I don't know the scope and the full issue with the pipeline flexibility and differential settlement and so forth, but there are flexible joints that one can use. They're not cheap, but they can accommodate different degrees of angular movement with flexible joints, and even bare steel hose pipe is a steel pipe that is kind of braided. So, and they have very high pressure application processes via up to 250 psi, which I don't know again the criteria in this pump station, but I assume that it's going to be less than 250 psi. So there are products that are not cheap, but they can accommodate. And if you have some sort of engineering field that can accommodate this movement, again, the design and some of the equipment becomes expensive, but there are always means to do it.
yeah, absolutely. And I think we'll bring in, as part of a future discussion, some videos of some of those. EBA Iron is one company that does a
That's
lot
right.
of
Yes,
custom type products that,
And Flexonics, I just worked recently with, we were between EVA Iron in a project that I was working with, and Flexonics is the one that has these braided steel hoses. So anyway, yeah, well, thank you so much.
we'll check out that other one. You said Flex Sonic?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. No other questions? So that wraps up the project updates. So back to you. Any future agenda items?
Okay, board members, any thoughts on future agenda items?
Just the last thing related to one of your recent topics was, if you're going to be building survey monuments, you might consider one in the area of that pedestrian bridge on Paradise, just to understand what's going on out there.
Yeah. And just technicality reasons, we're going to be checking elevations of known features, so reference points. If we build a monument, it triggers a whole
Right.
Record survey process, but we're just getting the elevations of known.
Understood.
Yeah. Sorry to get too into the weeds on that. But that's a good point. We can probably add that one.
Yeah, one idea is the maintenance of our slotted drains. They seem to be getting filled up with sediment and road debris. I don't know if there's a way to take out the grate and just power wash it, or not. Just the street sweepers are not keeping them.
Yeah, no, they definitely do that this time of year. And then based on your proximity to the location, it sounds like they haven't done it yet, but it's definitely, it will happen. It's not something they would miss or forget.
They were out in our neighborhood
Okay,
last week or two.
sounds about right. Yeah,
It was a weekend, I think.
okay. Yeah, you know, our team is short staffed, so I did hear them saying they're kind of a couple weeks behind, but it definitely will happen this month. So.
But are they just doing the catch basins or the actual
No,
sludge?
they're grabbing
Yeah.
the drains out and they had a Vector truck out there and they were
Cool.
mucking around with gloves and pulling debris out.
Second one that Chair Bundy reminded me of in our discussion today is from the climate assessment. Let's not forget the projects that were in there and let us help you engage with the community, and maybe long-term project is think of a plan of how to get those projects, you know, shovel ready or something down the road. You know, is it gonna be a 10-year process or 5-year process? That's it.
Okay. Meeting adjourned.